Hello and welcome back to the Shark Source Podcast, episode 29. I'm joined as always by Shaedon, and we've got a huge episode coming up for you today. So much news. It has been a while since our last episode. We've both been pretty busy, but we have a ton to cover for you, so let's get into it. We're going to be talking about the free agent frenzy and some of the trades that have happened since then. We're not going to get into the draft because by now it's kind of old news, and we know for a fact that you've probably already read enough about it. So we're just going to cover the major trades from around draft day and then get into free agency. So we hope you guys enjoy. We're going to be starting off with the biggest trade before or during on draft day, the Seth Jones trade. So Chicago Chicago acquired Seth Jones from the Columbus Blue Jackets for Adam Bachvist, a 2021 first, a 2021 second, and a 2022 first. And the Blackhawks received a 2021 first, the 32nd overall pick, and a 2022 sixth, along with Seth Jones, who they immediately re-signed to a 8-year, $9.5 million contract. So, Shaedon, let's just get right into it. What do you think of this trade? Seth Jones reunited with his brother in Chicago.
I hate the trade for Chicago so much, and I mean it's one thing because I don't think Chicago is a contender, but another thing because I think they massively overpaid for Seth Jones. First of all, I love Adam Bachquist, and if you're bringing in Seth Jones, and like I'm not dissing Seth Jones, he's still a good player, and I mean it was wide reported that if you're gonna get Seth Jones, one of Doc DeBrincat or Bachquist has to be in the trade. And I mean, all those three guys have elite futures ahead of themselves. So it kind of made sense that Bach was in this trade. I love Bachquist. I think he's gonna be a future top pairing defenseman. But for Jones's case, like I don't think he's really been good since 2018, and that's the thing. He's had three downhill years, and I don't think he's at the level where he was when he was 23, 24 years old, when he was supposed to be a top 10 defenseman. And I mean, to add to the fact that they also gave a pick like 12 or pick 11 in this draft, which allowed the Jackets to get Cole Sillinger, and they added another first round pick next year and another second round pick next year. Like, though that's a price you pay for, guys like Victor Hedman, or guys like those. But it's for Seth Jones. I get it. You want to lock him up in his prime, but I mean, you definitely overpaid for that, and I don't think he's worth $9.5 million over 8 years. Like that's $500K less than Jack Eichel. That's almost double digits. You're paying him like he's one of the best defensemen in the league when he really isn't. And I think for Columbus, they've just had a great offseason. I love this trade for them. They're obviously rebuilding. I think Bachus will be a huge part to that defense core, especially with the future of Zach Werenski. I hate it for Chicago. I mean, there's other issues with the Hawks that we won't discuss about, but it's just I just really hate this trade for Chicago. I don't know why they're buying. They should just continue to rebuild, let their young players develop, but I just don't like it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this was not a good move for Chicago. They seem to be loading up as if they're going to go on a cup run, which I personally think they would have been better off rebuilding. I can understand that they want to contend again while they still have Kane and Taves and they're still producing, but I just don't think that this was the right move, even if you are going to try and contend. They gave up way too much for Jones, who is just not worth that kind of assets in a trade and not worth that kind of assets in money. I don't see how you can pay him more than Victor Hedman. He's paid more than the new deal Dougie Hamilton just signed that we'll get into. He's paid more than Cale Makar's extension. This just does not make any sense from the Blackhawks' perspective. I understand that they wanted to upgrade, make a big splash, but this is just way too much. And for Columbus, this is another great move. They're rebuilding. I think they learned their lesson from when they didn't trade Panarin at the deadline, and they tried to go for it with that core when they beat Tampa in that one series. And now they're realizing that they do need to rebuild, and I think they're on a great start. But let's just look at Seth Jones. I mean, he has 30 points in 2019-20 and 28 last year. He only played 56 games in both of those seasons, but his career high in points is 57. And I know he's a defenseman, and I'm personally am a fan of defensemen who are defensive defensemen. But with that kind of money, you have to have a defenseman who can do both, and he just doesn't do that. Luckily for him, the Sharks have three defensemen who are on worse contracts, so it's definitely not the worst contract in the league. I don't think he's a bad defenseman at all. I actually think he's very good, but just not worth this kind of trade. And so far, not a good move for Chicago. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next trade on draft day. We can't spend too much time on each individual move because there were so many. So we're just gonna get right into this next one. The Columbus Blue Jackets make another deal. They reacquire Jacob Voracek in exchange for Cam Atkinson to Philadelphia. So Shaedon, what are your initial thoughts on this trade?
This one was kind of weird because it kind of just came out of nowhere. Um, I mean, Atkinson, has been there for quite some time. I think he was drafted in like in '09 or '08, so he's had some ties to the organization. And I mean, I guess it's kind of more of a culture change for both sides. We know that Philly wanted to dump Voracek's contract. It's not because Voracek was bad. I just think they wanted a fresh start. He wanted, to be somewhere new, even though he's played in Columbus before when he was drafted. I mean, I don't think there's really a clear-cut winner because both teams just kind of make out the same. Maybe Philly wins because Atkinson's a bit better, and he gets paid less. But I think it's a solid trade for both teams.
Yeah, I would go with Philly winning this trade. Again, I don't think the value is too different. I think they're pretty similarly talented players. So I would give Philly the win just because he's cheaper. And from the Jackets' perspective, I don't really understand it because if you want to get rid of Atkinson, that's fine. He is 32 and you are rebuilding. But why acquire another veteran? That doesn't make sense. So Columbus must believe that Voracek can have a bounce back and play even better than Atkinson and then believe that they can flip him. You have to imagine he doesn't stay in Columbus too long. So, interesting move. I would give this one to Philly, but definitely will be interested to see how it plays out. And Philadelphia, they're loading up. Say what you want. We're not going to get into the Ellis deal because that was too long ago. I'm sure you've heard about it, but Philadelphia is definitely trying to make a push. They were not satisfied with how last season ended, and they think they can be more like the team that was in 2019-20. So we'll see how that happens. Okay, now we're going to start getting into the signings. So let's just get right into it. There's a lot of minor signings, too, that went on that we're not going to cover. We're just going to cover the larger signings. We're not going to get too far into the minor ones. So let's just start with one of the biggest questions going into free agency that was just narrowly avoided. We'll start with the Gabe Landeskog contract. So Landeskog re-signs with the Avalanche 7 years, 8 years, $7 million per year. A lot of people thought that he was actually going to go to free agency. Those contract talks seem to have fallen apart, but he ends up staying in Colorado. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this deal?
I think it might be a bit too long, but I think the money is exactly right for Landeskog. I mean, if they were going to lose Landeskog, that would have been such a huge loss for them, especially since he's their captain and number one left winger. I mean, I think they should have cut the years down to 7 or 6. I mean, at that money, it's pretty solid. And it was interesting to watch it unfold because there's a lot of rumors that if he did hit free agency, who'd be on him, and we heard St. Louis's name come up a couple times. But I just think it's a good deal on both sides. But they obviously need to start winning now because they've lost in the second round, Game 7, 3 straight years. So they gotta get something done in the incoming years when Nathan McKinnon's contract is gonna end and he gets paid around 12 mil.
Yeah, Colorado made some solid moves. They re-signed Makar. We won't get too much into that. They re-signed Landeskog. And we'll get into their other moves, their trades later on. But yeah, these are all keeping the core together, which is good. But you have to think that they need to do something else to get that extra edge to make the next step and go into the cup. Because a lot of people have said for the past 2 years, maybe even 3 years, that this team is a cup contender, and yet they are basically not really upgrading from this team that has been unable to get out of the second round. So should be interesting to see what they do in the rest of this offseason. Panthers made a couple of moves, so we'll talk about both of them. First, they, from the Sabres, acquire Sam Reinhart in exchange for Devin Levi and a 2022 first round pick. And then they re signed Sam Bennett to a 4-year deal for $4.4 million per year. So, Shane, what do you think about these two deals? They also moved on from Anton Strawman. They had to give up a pick to get his contract off the books to the Coyotes. So a few interesting moves for the Panthers. Shaedon, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely love the Sam Reinhart trade, especially since he didn't even cost that much. I mean, Devin Levi might be a starter, and yeah, sure he might not. He was pretty good for Team Canada last year, but I mean, that first round pick is going to be pretty low, especially since the Panthers are a really good team. And the Sabres somehow got more for Rasmus Ristolainen, who's not a really good defenseman, than Sam Reinhart, who was one of their best players last year. Sam Bennett, now he did blossom into the player he was supposed to be after being traded from Calgary, but it's such a small sample size. If he doesn't repeat that again, then you're just stuck with a bad contract. And I mean, Zito so far in his career has been really good. I think it's one of the first head scratching moves he's made. We'll see if it works out though. Strawman. It didn't really cost him a lot either. I think they traded a prospect and a couple other things to get rid of 5.5 mil, which allowed him to do other things in free agency. So I mean, I think that was a dub for them. But yeah, I think the Bennett contract could hurt them if he doesn't, if he doesn't get going on that line with Huberdeau and Duclair like he did last year.
Yeah, that was a huge risk, because he was so bad with Calgary. Calgary moved him on from him at the deadline, and I didn't think it was a good move to acquire him for the Panthers. He got red hot at the right time for them, and now he's been rewarded with a contract, but that's a lot of money. And the issue with that contract is the Panthers have a lot of other things they need to do. They have cap space after they moved Strawman. They have about $8.5 million right now, but Barkov has 1 year left on his deal, and then he's a UFA. So that has to be number one priority, extending him. The trade, while I like bringing in Sam Reinhart, he's a restricted free agent, so they have to sign him too, and that's not going to be cheap. So they're going to have, Barkov could easily command more than the $8 million that they have in cap space already, and that's without re-signing Reinhart. And a lot of this, I think, is because they really paid a lot of money for players who, maybe they deserve it. Verhaeghe receiving 4.14, re-signing a bunch of guys, but Brandon Montour included. But if you re-sign too many depth players, you're not going to be able to afford your big stars. So hopefully they can figure that out. But individually, I think those were pretty good moves, and getting rid of Strawman was something they absolutely had to do in order to get the cap space that they need. So Panthers should be looking at cup contention. I know they didn't make it out of the first round and haven't since 1996, but with this team they should be cup contenders. There's anything less than a deep run in the playoffs right now would be a failure for Bill Zito and the Panthers. Okay, so now we'll get into our next trade, or rather our next signing of the day. I'm not going to get, again, like we said, we have to skip over some of them just because we can't cover everything. So Ovechkin re-signed in Washington. I don't think we need to get into that. Patrick Laine accepted his qualifying offer, 1 year, $7.5 million. We don't really need to get into that because it's nothing new. We know that Columbus will probably move him during the season. So let's just get into our next more surprising deal. Let's talk about Zach Hyman going to Edmonton. So this was something that some people have been predicting a little bit before it was done, and I saw some higher numbers for the average, so I'm sure Oilers fans were happy to see that it wasn't that high, but it's still a very long deal, 7 years, $5.5 million. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts as an Oilers fan on this contract?
It's weird because I absolutely adore Zach Hyman as a player. Because since I'm up here in Canada, I get to see every Leafs game because it's always on. But I love Zach. I mean, he's a great forechecker. He can play the penalty kill well. He's a net front presence. He brings incredible leadership. He's like a great player. Every shift he plays his heart and soul out there. That's what every Leafs fan has told me. He's every night he does something and he leads the team. And yeah, the 70 years is the bad part. He'll be 36 when it ends, which I mean is which is bad. But I mean for the first 4 to 5 years, he'll be good. He'll be worth a 5.5. And the Oilers desperately needed a top six winger ever since they traded Jordan Eberle. Um, and I mean at 5.5, I mean at first I think the rumored was like 6.5 for 7 years, which would have been bad, but it got cut down by a million, thankfully. But yeah, I love this deal. Later on, it's definitely going to hurt, but the Oilers want to buy it out. I actually checked Cap Friendly. It's only a 1.8 million buyout. Like, it's not the buyout isn't that expensive. Compared to Lucic when he signed, there it was buyout proof. Hyman's actual buyout is really really cheap. So if they want to buy out the last 2 years, they can, and it would only cost them 1.8 mil compared to the 5.5. Obviously, that's through 4 years because you got to double the years. But I love this signing for the Edmonton. I think he'll fit in well with McDavid and Puljujarvi, which allow Nuge to play with Draisaitl and Yamamoto, and it just completes the Oilers' top six. And they needed this kind of player last season, and it really showed against the Jets. So I'm happy. I'm really happy with the signing. Once again, the term's a bit long, but you can't complain about it for the first 4 or 5 years.
And that's the takeaway I see for a lot of contracts this offseason. It's going to be bad at the end, but it improves the team right now. And the thing is, the Oilers have the greatest player in the world on their team, and they have another arguably a top 5, easily a top 10 player in Draisaitl. And you need to improve the team and make a run at a cup while they're young. And so even if this contract will hurt you later on, this absolutely makes the Oilers' offense much better. And Ken Holland has to make this move. And sometimes you're going to have bad contracts at the end. But you know what? If you win a cup, then it doesn't matter. So he made some questionable moves this offseason, but I think this one overall is a pretty good move for the Oilers. Okay, now we're going to get into two moves by Vegas. So first, Vegas trades Marc-Andre Fleury to the Blackhawks for Mikhail Hakkarainen. And then they extend Alec Martinez. So Martinez they had acquired from the Kings a few seasons ago. We thought maybe he would walk, but they end up extending him. So this is an interesting two moves. Obviously, Vegas fans, you can tell, are just absolutely heartbroken by this move. They really loved Fleury. When I went to a game in Vegas, I saw Game 5 of Vegas versus Montreal this summer in Vegas, and Fleury was easily the most popular player. Everyone in the arena went crazy when he got on the ice. Everyone had his jersey. So to see him moved was tough for the fans, but I think objectively this makes a lot of sense. I'll get into my thoughts later, but Shaedon, what are your thoughts on these two deals? And just to let everyone know, the term for the Martinez deal, 3 years, $5.25 million per.
I would like the Fleury trade if he haven't came out and said I might not play for the Hawks. Because now, I mean, sure, you got the Vezina Trophy winner, but if he doesn't play for you, then what are you gonna do? And I mean, for Vegas, I'm kind of disappointed with the way they handled it. I mean, Fleury found out by it on Twitter or something like that. Like they didn't even let him know beforehand that he was getting traded. You don't treat your fan favorite player or any player like that. I mean, he's already been backstabbed once by the Penguins, and the fact that you're doing it to him it isn't right. Now, if Fleury does end up playing for Chicago, that would make them a lot. I mean, way better. I mean, Fleury's 37, 38, and he's putting up incredible numbers still. And it would really help that team. I wouldn't say Chicago's still a contender with Fleury, but it will make them, competitive. But he might not play for them, and that's the one takeaway I get from this trade. If Fleury doesn't play, I mean, no team really wins here because the player Chicago gave up in the deal is still going to play for Chicago's farm team. I think Vegas is going to loan him to
Yeah.
Chicago's farm team. So basically, both teams just get nothing. So for me, I gotta wait and see if Fleury does play. Obviously, Chicago wins this. If he doesn't play, it's just like, all right, what happens now? And for Martinez, I think Martinez is a great defenseman. Of course, I think the money is fine. I think the term. I think he's like already 34, which is so weird. Just 7 years ago, he got the cup-winning goal, and now he's 34. But um, I mean, he's going to be 37 when that deal ends, and I don't know if he holds up that long. Maybe for the first 2 years, he'll be great, but I just can't see him being that good on the third year of his deal, especially since Vegas is already up there against the cap. I think there could have been cheaper options. They wouldn't be better than Martinez, but they would have been cheaper, and they would have still got the job done. So I so far I'm not really liking Vegas this offseason, and I'm pretty sure they're still over the cap. So there's probably another couple moves coming for the Knights. But yeah, just for me, two kind of wash moves there.
Yeah, so for the Flurry trade, I would sort of disagree. I love this for Vegas. They needed cap space, and I'm gonna be honest. I think Leonard is a better goalie. Now Flurry is the reigning Vezina winner, and I think he's a very good goalie. Leonard is younger. He's on a cheaper contract, and I think the year before last year rather, he played better. And I think this previous season he was about as good. And I think they were wrong to go with Flurry in Game 5 versus Montreal. So I think keeping Leonard was the right call. It doesn't make sense to have two goalies making, two starting quality goalies on your team when in a cap league. So I think Vegas was right to move him. Now, whether or not the thing about him learning from Twitter is true, here's what the GM of Vegas, Kelly McCrimmon, had to say. He said that the reason that this was the case was that the rumors were out on Twitter before the trade call was finalized with the league. And he said that he wouldn't notify the player until the trade call is completed in case it didn't go through. That's what he said in his press conference. Now, maybe he should have had better control over how it leaked out, because obviously he must have been telling someone, or Stan Bowman must have been telling someone. That's how it gets out on Twitter and Fleur hears about it. So we'll see what happens. And when it comes to playing for the other team, again, this is Alan Walsh, Fleury's agent, who said this on Twitter, that Fleury is seriously evaluating his future in hockey. If he doesn't play for the Hawks, I mean, this is just a huge embarrassment for them, because basically what he's saying is, I don't like your organization. I don't want to play for you. So hopefully for Chicago, they can convince him to play. And I do think he will play for them, because after, he cools down and his emotions stop running as high, I think he'll realize that Chicago is a pretty talented team. And, if he does play for them, they're a lock for the playoffs, I think. And certainly will be competitive in the West. So we'll see what happens. I love it for Vegas, and I also love it for Chicago if Fleury plays for them. Now, with how they spent their cap spaces, this is sort of the problem I have with Vegas. So I don't really have a problem with extending Martinez, but I do have a problem with another move they made, which is bringing in Yevgeny Dadonov. They give up Nick Holden and a third to the Senators for Dadonov, which I don't have a huge problem with. But Dadonov is being paid $5 million per year, and he honestly had a disappointing season with the Sens last year. Only put up 13 goals in 55 games, which isn't terrible, but at $5 million, Vegas has better uses of that money. And more importantly, Vegas has been rumored to be in on Jack Eichel. But now that they've committed 5.25 to Martinez and 5 to Dadonov, I don't know how they fit in Eichel. Right now on Cap Friendly, it's listed that they have 0 cap space. So I don't know, Shaedon. How would they even fit in Eichel? And do you think that the Dadonov move was just not a wise cap management move?
One thing I heard is that I think Buffalo wants the first, Krebs, Smith, and something else. And if
Yeah.
you're Vegas, I think you jump over that. I like getting Dadonov. I think he's a fine, second liner. I think the year in Ottawa just went bad because like last season was just kind of a weird year. So I don't
Yeah.
blame him for struggling. But I think on a team like Vegas with all the talent there, I think he'll probably excel. Become a 50-point, 20-goal scorer like he was in Florida. Um, I mean, Vegas still needs that center though, because I mean Chandler Stevenson is good, but I mean you don't want him as the first line center in the playoffs. So I mean I still predict that Vegas gets Eichel somehow because it's Vegas. Maybe they do the River package right now with Smith the first and all that stuff. But time will tell. But I'm actually high on him getting Dadonov. I think he's gonna exceed expectations.
We'll see, but the issue is even with that trade, Riley Smith is at 5 million, Eichel's at 10, so that leaves still a $5 million hole in the salary, and Haig is getting paid less than a million. So they would have to move off of another big piece, and I don't know who that would be. They also re-extended Janmark and brought in Brossois. Janmark and Brossois combined with Haig would be about 5 million. I thought they overpaid for both of them if the cost of them is not getting Eichel. So we'll see how they can figure out how to fit him in. It'll be very difficult. But I think if Vegas does bring in Eichel, that would be huge, and I think that would put them as the Cup favorites, or at least favorites for the Western Conference. So we'll see what happens. But very interesting moves. And again, if these were the only moves that had happened, it would still be a pretty big offseason. But there are so many
Yeah.
moves, it's hard. We can't spend too much time on just this. So we are going to move on from that, as interesting as that area is. So this is more of a minor trade compared to that, and I wouldn't cover it unless it was the Oilers. But because it's Edmonton, we are going to talk about Ethan Bear and Warren Foegele. So the Oilers trade Ethan Bear to Carolina for Warren Foegele. I've seen some reactions from some Oilers fans who have actually been more positive. But Shaedon, I know you do not like this trade. So tell us, what do you think of this one?
It's not that I hate the trade because I think it's actually a pretty decent trade. I think the problem with it is the context behind it. Because I like Warren Fogle, I really do. And I like Ethan Bear, but I think there could have been better ways to upgrade your bottom six and to keep Ethan Bear. I think you could have let. I know the loss of Larson to Seattle hurts, but you could have let Larson just go to Seattle. You could have let go of Barry because you have Bouchard already waiting in the wings. And I mean, they signed Cody Cece, right? And we'll touch on Cece in a sec. But I mean, what was wrong with Bouchard, Bear, and Cece down your right side? And then the money you spend on Barry, you can just let him walk and just use that money to sign your Warren Fogle in free agency. Like, it could have just done that. And I mean, Bear. It's not like Bear is going to turn into Jeff Petrie 2.0. I mean, I hope he doesn't, but I don't think he will. But it's just the fact that he's just a 25-year-old young right shot defenseman, who can play defense, and he's cheap, and that's what Edmonton kind of needs right now. And I get it. He was probably their best trade chip to bring in somebody, and you want to improve that bottom six. And like I said, I like Warren Fogle, but the context behind it is what makes it bad. I wish Bear the best. I think he's probably going to play third pair in Carolina. I mean, they just signed Brendan Smith 20 minutes ago or something like that, and they have like 20 NHL defensemen like they always do. So who knows? Maybe Carolina has plans to use Bear in a bigger trade, because I mean they already have guys like Slavin, Brett Pesci, Jake Gardner, a lot of these guys. They just signed Tony DeAngelo for whatever reason, but they have a lot of NHL guys. So maybe they have plans to flip Bear to bring in another forward on a bigger package. We'll wait and see. But like the trade itself is pretty fair value. Maybe slightly to Carolina because the right shot defense thing, like I mentioned. But the context behind it is what really makes it bad for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's tough losing Larson and Bear, and I don't have a problem with Fogel either, but for Edmonton this offseason, their D is not looking like cup contending quality. I'll just say that. Um,
Yeah.
they look honestly below average on the back end. So, and with Mike Smith in net so far, I mean that they haven't upgraded in goal at all. I mean, it doesn't look like a recipe for success. So we'll see how they manage that. There's still some goalies out there. Maybe they make a trade, or maybe I don't know. Maybe they bring in another defenseman. But right now, not looking good on the back end for Edmonton. All right, so we'll move on. Ryan Suter signing with Dallas Stars. We won't spend too long on him, but he was bought out by Minnesota. 4 years, 3.65 million. You want to briefly give your thoughts on that deal?
I mean, Suter's still fine. I don't know why they bought him out. I mean, Parise it made sense, but you're buying out Suter too, and that cap penalty is not good in years 4, 5, and 6. But that's another topic. Suter's fine at whatever 3.5, 3%, whatever he's making. That's fine. The 4 years though is where I have a problem because he'll be 40 years old, and he has that no movement clause again. I think he would have won 2 years with a modified no trade clause. That would have been a lot better. I understand why Suter wanted the contract he wants stability. He wants to, play for Dallas. He wants to stay in Dallas. He wants to win that cup in Dallas. And he certainly strengthens that decor with already guys like John Klingberg, Heiskanen, Lindell. They added Hockenpot today. Like that's a solid. That's a really good defense there. I mean, that's what a contending team would have. I think Dallas needs to upgrade on the forwards. I don't like the Braden Holtby signing though. I think they should just keep it open, but they may trade him. But yeah, I'm not a biggest fan of the Holtby signing. I think forwards wise, they need to get a little bit better. But right now, Dallas is making the right moves after a disappointing year.
Yeah, I sort of can agree with Dallas sort of going for excuse me, going for it. And the reason is their core, their stars are getting old. Jamie Benn is 32, Tyler Seguin is 29. Heiskanen's young, but Hudobin is old. I can't imagine they would bring in Holtby to start after the season he had. Maybe they still believe in Bishop, but I don't know. I think this move, even if it is a little too long, Dallas's window is closing very quickly. They missed the playoffs last year after losing in the Cup final the year before. So I think they don't have too much time left where they're real Cup contenders. So even if this deal might hurt them at the end, they're just trying to get better next season. And I think this deal does that. Okay, we'll move on. Carolina, very confusing offseason for Carolina. So they trade Nedeljkovic. We won't get too much into that. But for the return, they got the rights to Jonathan Bernier, who was a UFA, and a third. But then they don't sign Bernier, so basically it's just Nedeljkovic for a third to Detroit. And instead they bring in two goalies who I actually think they're both pretty good goalies at pretty good value. Antti Ranta, 2 years for $2 million, and Freddie Anderson, 2 years for $4.5 million. So a combined $6.5 million over the next 2 years for two pretty good goalies. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts on these two deals for Carolina?
I just don't know why they didn't want to pay Nedeljkovic 3.5, but they're going to give Anderson 4.5, especially because since Nedeljkovic was third in the Calder. Like, I mean, that's a guy that you signed for 3.5. Like, I mean, if I was Nedeljkovic, I would ask for 4 or 5 mil. So, I mean, I'm kind of confused on that front why they decided to pay Anderson more. But, I mean, their goaltending's fine. I mean, once again, they have a million NHL defense. Like, Carolina's still going to be a good team next year. I just think that if they fail to meet expectations again, what happens? And they still got to sign Svechnikov, but they're going to save money. They have to save money for that, of course. But I'm excited to watch the Canes. I mean, they added Ian Cole, which is going to help the two goalies on the back end, especially since both have had. I mean, both goalies have had injury issues lately. So I mean, we'll see what happens there as well, but. That those two goals can play behind a solid defense. Like I mentioned, I already called out Slavin. Pesci's one of the most underrated defensemen. You got Ian Cole on a solid deal. I mean, Jake Gardner, Ethan Bear, which they just brought in. Like, it's a good group, but is Frederick Anderson, the guy that's gonna carry you over? The hump. Like, he didn't do that in Toronto. He didn't do that in Anaheim. Is he going to do it in Carolina? We'll see. But, I mean, it was a solid day for the Kings for sure. I wouldn't say they improved their team, but I wouldn't say they necessarily downgrade their team by a lot. I think they're kind of roughly in the same patch. But, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more on the Canes later when we go over the Hamilton signing, but I think these two moves were pretty good. I think Anderson has a lot more upside than he's shown over the past 2 seasons. I do think he can get back to being that 918 goalie that he was, 918 save percentage goalie he was with Toronto. I really do think so. I know Carolina has a better defense than Toronto did while he was with them. And Auntie Rance is something I'm really intrigued by because he really has shown a lot of potential. Just 2 seasons ago, he put up a 9-2-1 with Arizona while he was with competing with Kemper. So it should be interesting to see what will happen. I think they're both could turn out to be excellent goaltending signings. They could also fail. This was a pretty high risk play for Carolina. And yet it was interesting that they don't lock up Nedeljkovic, but these are short contracts, which I think are good for veteran goalies, and we'll see how they, not a long contract like Jones had. So I think that goaltending wise, I think for next season, I don't think Carolina got worse in net. A lot of people might disagree with that, but I do believe in Rontan Anderson. So I don't think they got worse bringing these guys for next season. Okay, so we'll get more into them later, but we got another contract. This was a big one. Blake Coleman to the Calgary Flames, 4.9 million, pretty good AAV, 6 years, a long deal for an aging player. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this one?
When the rumor said he was gonna get 5 mil in 6 years, I was kind of like, I don't know about that. And Coleman's already like turning 31 like this year. Like he'll be kind of like Jaime. He'll be 36 when that deal ends. But Coleman never struck me as a player that's like a top six guy. He's more of a middle six guy. And he is great defensively. He's great on the PK. He can play on your second unit power play. But I mean, are you gonna pay a guy 5 mil to get you around 35 points, maybe 40 points, to be a defensive forward? Like, I don't know about that. Like, I like Coleman. I think he'll be a good fit on Calgary, but I just don't know about that term. That's what scares me. He will just like Heim, like he may be good for the first 2 years, but the last couple years are going to be killer. Especially since I think Calgary is in a stage where I think they should especially rebuild with Monahan up in 2 years. They may trade him with Gaudreau out in a year or so. They just lost their captain. Like I think this might be the perfect opportunity to rebuild, but it looks like they're gonna just start buying and going all in again, which I don't think it's the right approach. So we'll see. I think Coleman's good. I would have personally gave him 4.5, around 4 or 4 years, but you got to overpay for free agents. So
Yeah,
we'll see how this turns out.
the problem with guys like him, this is another contract where I think it's, playoff success has really driven up his value. I love him. I think he's a great defensive forward, and I think on the third line in Tampa, it was a perfect role for him. I don't know if 6 years, that's just going to be a huge problem, and he's 29 already. I don't know if I love this contract. I've seen some people say this was a great deal. I think that term is just way too long. I don't really mind the money if it was a shorter deal. I could give him 4.9 if it was a 3-year deal easily. But 6 years, that's a long time. But if you're Calgary, you have to overpay to get guys to come there when you haven't had too much success recently. Calgary, they're a very confusing team for me. We'll get more into them in a future episode when we, maybe closer to the season, because they're going to be very interesting to see how they finish. But does make the team better. Say what you want about the contract, but it does improve the team, and that's what the GM does have to do if you're not rebuilding. Okay, so now we'll move on. I'm not gonna cover David Savard or Martin Jones. Those ones, even though they're kind of big contracts, there's just too much news to get into those. We will briefly go over Cody Ceci because that is Oilers related. So Ceci, 4 years, 3.25 to Edmonton. Ceci was hated in Toronto, but he had a very good season in Pittsburgh last year, surprising a lot of people, and he got paid in Edmonton. So what are your thoughts on this contract?
I don't hate the money because I think that's what he was going to get nevertheless. I just hate the term. I think if it was a 1 or 2 year deal, it would have been fine. But 3 or 4 years for Cody Ceci is really, really pushing it. I think 3 years from now, Edmonton should have Barry, Bouchard, and Ceci. That's just not how it's going to work. I had a theory of my own, thinking, maybe guys like Colton Parayko, next year for agents, or they could be rentals at the deadline if St. Louis fails to qualify. And Edmonton still needs that right hand shutdown defenseman. And CC, who I think has improved, especially from his Ottawa days where he was terrible. I mean, they still have lacked that, shutdown right hand defenseman that most teams need, which they had in Adam Larson before he went to Seattle. So, maybe they can use CC or Barry as, kind of as like just trade bait, and they could package other stuff, to get a guy Pareko. But I mean, that's just my wishful thinking. But I mean, I don't hate CC. I think I would preferably have him on the third pair because I kind of want to shelter him. He plays really well in shelter minutes. He's actually a good defensive player in shelter minutes. He's a good PKer. He hits a lot. He's not as physical as Larson, but I mean that's fine. I expect Edmonton to sign another defenseman anyways, but I mean it's just a term that I hate. 4 years is especially a lot. I think if it was a 2 or 1 year deal, it would have been better. But once again, we'll just have to see how training camp is. Maybe CC surprises people again. He becomes a solid shutdown defenseman. But time will tell. Once again, the money's fine at 3.25. I have no problems with that. It's just it's a bit above market value, but it's fine. But the term is the big issue, and if they think CC's gonna be good for those 4 years, we'll have to wait and see.
The one thing I will say about CC is he is younger than a lot of these other defensemen who got contracts. He is 27 right now, so at the end of the contract he'll be 32 because he'll turn 28 during the season. So that's not as bad as it could have been. But I don't really hate this deal. I think that CC is better than a lot of people were saying. I think his true self is more like what he was in Pittsburgh than Toronto. But I do think the Oilers just have a lot of money on defense. And they're spending a lot of money for defensemen when they don't have a great defense, and that is a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the next contract. So we'll go with the Jonathan Bernier one, and we'll also talk about at the same time Dougie Hamilton. So these were two moves the Devils made. So they bring in Jonathan Bernier for 2 years at 4.1 million, 4.125 million, and then they bring in Dougie Hamilton for a huge contract, 7 years, 9 million per year. Very interesting for the Devils, who seem to be rebuilding. They traded Palmieri. They moved off Hall a couple years ago, but now they're buying in after having a bad season last year. Interesting move. So what do you think of these two deals?
I mean, I love the Dougie Hamilton sign. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Dougie Hamilton didn't want to go to a big market. He hates the big markets, and he got paid like he's worth 9 million. He's a Norris caliber defenseman. Now, I don't think. I mean, maybe in 30 years, New Jersey become a contender. They have a lot of solid young pieces there. But for the first couple years, it's gonna be a slow rebuild. Getting up there, and can become a great leader. I mean, he's obviously their number one defenseman. I think he'll be a great pair with Ryan Graves, who they acquired earlier. I love it, and I think with Jonathan Bernier too, that's a solid tandem goalie to have with Mackenzie Blackwood, who's still on the younger side. So I think New Jersey actually has had a great offseason. They've improved their team while still being young, and they're still sticking to the plan to rebuild. So I mean, I'd watch out for New Jersey in a couple years. I think they're going to be a pretty good team.
New Jersey certainly improved in the offseason. I think Bernier playing for Detroit to put up a 9.14 in front of save percentage in front of Detroit, I think is very impressive. So I don't have a problem with that contract. But I do have a problem with the Hamilton contract. I do. I think right now, is he worth 9 million? Sure, I actually do think that's fine. But to sign him for 7 years at age 28 for 9 million, I just don't think you can do that if you're the Devils, because I'm okay with signing contracts that will be bad at the end if the team is in a cup contending position right now. But the problem is, I don't think the Devils are in a cup contending position right now, and I don't think they will be for at least a few years. And the problem, of course, is that if you're not in a cup contending position for a few years, then by the time they are in cup contending position, Hamilton won't be worth 9 million. So I really don't like this deal for the Devils. I don't really understand um, why they are going out and buying players right now when they're so far away from cup contention. Now, for Dougie Hamilton, he seems like he just wanted to get the most money that he could because, you know, I'm sure there were other teams interested that offered him less. I know Carolina, it seems like they lowballed him. They were offering him between 6 and 7, but I don't know. I don't really understand this fit at all. Very surprising move from my perspective. Okay, so that's the Carolina Hurricanes. Now we'll get into finally the Sharks. This is the Sharks Source podcast, even though we
Yep.
don't cover them too much. So the Sharks made 3 moves this offseason. I'm just going to go over all 3 of them. So from Carolina, they're bringing in Bernier and out goes James Reimer. Reimer returns. Sharks legend James Reimer has returned. 2 years, 2.5 million. Sharks also bring in Benino, 2 years, 2.05 million, and then Andrew Cogliano, a 1 year, $1 million deal. So Shaedon, what are your thoughts on the Sharks making a big splash at the deadline?
I mean, I love the additions of Nick Bonino and Andrew Cogliano for your bottom six. I think there can be fine veteran presences. I think they can still play the game. I think Reimer and Hill is a significant improvement over Jones and Joseph Konar. And San Jose has improved over the offseason. I just still think with their bad contracts that they might not make. They probably won't make the playoffs in the Pacific. But I mean, it's a step in the right direction. I mean, for some reasons, I'm hearing trade rumors about guys like Hurdle and stuff, which I think they should keep. But I mean, I like the offseason, and you guys are just getting players who are cheap, and they can help out. They can still help chip in here and there. So I've been impressed with Doug Wilson so far.
I definitely would have taken the team in a different direction if I were the GM. I don't understand why we haven't rebuilt. I would have loved the Sharks to use the expansion draft as an opportunity to get rid of Burns' contract because he does not have a no movement clause. So we could have given Seattle something to take him, and I would have liked a full teardown. However, Doug Wilson clearly thinks that the Sharks are contending. He does not want to rebuild, and these moves make it clear. Now, I do think all of these moves are actually pretty good because they do make the team better and they're not long term deals. They're all cheap contracts. I think all of them were good. I loved the Hill trade, and I would have loved the Hill trade if we had made it last year or the year before. Now I want us to sort of rebuild and tank, so I don't really understand why we're trying to improve. But if you do look at these moves from the standpoint of we're trying to get better, they all do make the team better, and I think they're all pretty good trade deals. So we'll see what happens. The Sharks clearly think they're going to make the playoffs, and in this year's Pacific Division, I don't really see that that's too hard to do. Vegas is the only team that you can really say is 100% a lock for the playoffs. After that, you've got Oilers, Vancouver, Calgary. They'll all contend. LA might make some noise. But really, I think San Jose could finish as high as second in the division and still not be a very good team. So we'll see what happens. The Sharks definitely improved by these moves. I'm not sure why we're trying to improve at this point because I don't think we have any shot at the cup, but all pretty solid moves in a vacuum if you just look at them individually.
Yeah.
We're not going to cover Jujhar Khaira. I know he's Oilers related, but there is just too much to get into him. So the next move we're going to talk about, Philip Grubauer. This was another very surprising move. We'll actually talk about him and Jaden Schwartz going to the Seattle Kraken. Very interesting because Seattle in the expansion draft, they did not draft the best players available. They wanted to pick young guys. They wanted to keep cap space, but they did not just go for the best players available. But now in the deadline, they brought in some big name. In free agency, they brought in some big names. So, what are your thoughts on these two contracts for Seattle? Let me just read off the averages: 6 years, 5.9 per year for Grubauer. 5 years, 5.5 for Schwartz.
I'm confused about Grubauer, especially since he got Drieger in the expansion draft. I like Grubauer, but it's like, okay, so what was the point of signing Drieger to starters money? And I mean, if they're gonna like, that's the thing. They're paying Grubauer 6 mil, and they're paying Drigger 3.5. Like, if you're making 6 mil, you're not supposed to be a tandem goalie. And I don't think Drigger wants to be a tandem goalie. So like, I really wonder what the plan is here. If they're gonna play 41-41, then what was the point of Grubauer leaving Colorado, where he's the clear cut starter, for an expansion team where he's not gonna have Nathan McKinnon by his side, or McCarr, or any of those guys, and being a 10, like, it made no sense. And I mean, I like Jordan Schwartz, but he's really been injury prone over the last couple of years. He's still a good winger, though. I think the money is fine. I think they could have went shorter in term, but I mean, I'm kind of confused about what Seattle does with the goaltending, because I
Yeah.
think
Go ahead.
because I think that you got Drieger to be your starter. Now you're bringing in Grubauer, so it's like, what's the point of Drieger and making his 3.5? Because Grubauer should be the starter at that point, and Drieger wants to get his chance somewhere else. So that's what I'm confused about.
And what's the point of making win now moves? Because both of these are win now moves. Neither of those guys are young. They're Grubauer. He's hasn't had too much time as a starter, but he's 29 years old. Schwartz is a veteran. Why bring in two veterans on contracts that aren't going to be worth it by the time they're up? When you're not going to be competitive, because from the expansion draft they could have drafted actually a pretty competitive team if that's what they were going for, but they were going for young guys and cap space, but then they use this. So maybe they're going to try and trade them, but those are very long contracts, so it'll be harder to trade them unless they have great years. And I completely agree with you. The whole point of Drieger and not taking Price was Drieger's the guy of the future. He's a young goalie. And then to bring in Grubauer doesn't really make sense. They'll have a very good goaltending tandem. I mean, those two guys are better than a lot of team starters. So they'll have a excellent. They'll probably have one of the best, if not the best, backup in the league, whoever it becomes. Or they'll just split exactly 50-50. So should be an interesting season for Seattle. Very confusing moves. And for Grubauer, I'm guessing he went to Seattle just because they offered him the most money, for the most term. That's the only reason I can imagine he would want to leave Colorado. Okay, next contract, Philip Deneau. He got paid. He goes to Los Angeles, a team who's been loading up on players, even though they haven't had much success under Todd McClellan. And they bring in Philip Deneau, 6 years, 5.5 million. So, what are your thoughts on this deal?
I mean, it's pretty fair. I mean, we all know that knows the defensive specialist. I mean, he won't put up a lot of offense, maybe 40, 50 points, 15 goals. But I mean, it was obvious from the start that Deneau wouldn't be back for the Canadians. They want to give their young kids more minutes, like Suzuki and Kokaniemi. I mean, I'm confused why Deneau would choose LA too, because they already have Obatar on line one. They're gonna have Turcotte and Byfield, at centers. Like, Deneau, like, near the end of that contract or in the middle, is gonna be back on the third line. Which is why I think him in Vegas made the most sense, because he would be their clear cut first line or second line center. And I mean, LA has been making moves, and they could easily sneak into the playoffs. But I think there are better fits for Deneau. I think there's a lot of teams with more cap room that could use him. I just don't know about the fit with LA. The contract's fine, but it's just the fit that I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, I think this could be another case of a player choosing money, which is fine. I mean, players, if that's what they prioritize, if they just want to get the most money that they can, that's fine. I personally do think this is a pretty big overpay, though. A player who's had 50 points once in his career, I just think that's too much money, and too long. He's not young, he's 28, and I don't. LA is not in a. They think they're in win now mode, but I don't think they're gonna win the cup. I think at best they'll make the playoffs this year. I don't think they'll win the cup soon. They have a lot of good young players, so I don't really see the point of giving a big contract to a veteran in free agency. But definitely they're going to be better next year, and I think Deneau will fit in with them, and he'll make them harder to play against. But I think it's too much money, too long for Deneau. Okay, moving on. We are getting through these. Again, there's a lot of interesting smaller contracts we won't get into. We can talk about D'Angelo real quick. The only reason is because it'll sort of give context to the Hamilton. Carolina moved off of Hamilton and brought in D'Angelo. Obviously, D'Angelo has a lot of um, off ice issues surrounding him. I'm sure you guys already know about these, but from a purely hockey perspective, 1 million is not a lot for him. I would say if he didn't have the off ice issues, he would have easily gotten a lot more than that. But I also think he's a pretty big downgrade offensively from Hamilton. What would you say?
I mean, I don't know why people are signing Tony DeAngelo in the first place after all these, problems have been surfacing over the past year and a half or so. And the thing is, Tony DeAngelo is a pretty talented player, but I mean, I just would not have signed the guy that bad reputation. Now, obviously, there's the Hamilton effect. I think D'Angelo replaces Hamilton's offense. I think Bear and Cole are good enough to replace Hamilton's defensively. And I mean, it's only a 1 year at 1 mil. At this point, it's like a show me contract. Prove you can still play in this league without these issues he's had in New York, Tampa, Arizona in the past. And maybe he redeems himself and becomes a better person and is still a good 40-point defenseman. We'll see. It's low risk, high reward, basically. But I think the main story here is that is will his character issues be resolved?
Yeah, we'll see. I think Rod Brendamore, the coach of Carolina, I think he would be pretty quick to, he's not like a soft coach. I think he'll probably be able to discipline him, keep him in line. I do think, if we can look past the off ice issues, there are still problems with D'Angelo defensively. I don't think he's as good of a, the defensive side of his game is as good as Hamilton. This is clearly a replacement for Hamilton. I don't think his offense will replace it. Now he is 9 times cheaper than him and on a shorter deal, so we'll see what happens. But I think objectively the contract is, he's worth more than 1 million, but you have to look at the fact that they're losing Hamilton. So overall, it's a downgrade on defense. So very interested to see how he plays in Carolina. Okay, now we'll get into the next biggest contract. This one, huge. Tampa, Braden Point resigns 8 years, 9.5 million. And as much money as that is still a team-friendly contract for Braden Point. So what are your thoughts on this extension?
It's a no tax effect. Like Tampa has no state tax, and Brand Points can get paid pretty cheap for the kind of player he is. Like if he was anywhere else, he was going to get 12 mil. But it's a great deal for Tampa Bay. I mean, nothing much else to say. Like Brand Point's unbelievable. He's probably one of the best playoff. I would call him a top 3 playoff performer in the league. He is just insane when it comes to postseason hockey. And for Tampa Bay, I mean, a great deal. He's your best. In my opinion, he's your second best player. I think Stamkos and Hedman are right behind him, and I mean, he is basically the future of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Because like Stamkos is like 31 years old, Kucherov is 29. Like these guys are aging. Braden Point is still in his like early 20s. So to lock up a guy like him long term, if that cheap, is extraordinary for Julian Breezeboy.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a great move for him. I think he could have easily gotten 12 at the open market. I will say a lot of people talk about the no state tax, but there are other states in the NHL that don't have a state tax. Texas, the Dallas Stars, no state tax. Vegas, Nevada doesn't have a state tax. Seattle, Washington State does not have a state tax. And yet we don't see these kinds of huge discounts for these other teams. I mean, look at the Duchesne contract, look at the Johansson contract for Nashville. Sagan didn't take a huge discount. These huge discounts don't happen for every team. I think it has more to do with Tampa being such a well-run organization than anything. And Braden Point, obviously, I think he's their probably second best or best forward, him and Kucherov. and locking him up long term is fantastic for Tampa. They lose a lot. They lost a lot of guys this offseason, but I think they're in a great position to three-peat after signing him, and I think they'll be cup contenders for years to come. Okay, we are getting close. We still have a few more, so we'll just get through these. Mike Hoffman goes to Montreal, 3 years, 4.5 million. Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this deal? I don't think anyone. I don't remember seeing any rumors about this, so I was very surprised to see this one happen. So, what are your thoughts on this deal?
Actually, I'm pretty sure last season that Hoffman was pretty close to signing with Montreal.
Yeah, I do
And
remember that.
I think they're interested at the deadline. So I'm not totally shocked that he signed there. But, I'm to be fair, I'm not the biggest fan of Hoffman's game. I think to me, he reminds me of Tyson Berry. He's a great power play guy, but when it comes to even strength, I mean, he cannot really defend well. And I mean, he's a winger, so you don't really expect him to play defense that well. But I mean, he doesn't really kind of show it at all whatsoever. And I mean, also the the Montreal Canadiens have a lot of wingers already. They have Toffoli, they have Caulfield, they have Jordan still, they have Gallagher, they got Byron, they got Armia, they got Anderson. They just signed Matthew Perreault. Like there's a lot of wingers on this team. There's Arturi Lekkinen. Like they have a lot of wingers. I just don't think Mike Hoffman's really the guy you go for. I think you kind of upgrade, maybe your center course with for Deneau gone. That's what I would have done. But I mean, and it's a 3-year deal. Like so, you're basically committed to keeping him for those 3 years at 4.5 million, which I mean isn't a lot of money, but I mean, when you have guys like Caulfield's contracts coming up, Suzuki's, and like all the other wingers I said, it makes no sense. He's just going to be buried in the bottom six. So if it was a 1-year deal, I would have been okay with it. I don't like the term, and I just don't think they really needed him.
So here's one where we actually disagree. I actually love this contract for Montreal. He did have a down year last season with St. Louis, but he is only 2 seasons removed from a 70-point season. He had 36 goals with the Panthers that year and had 29 the next season in a shortened season. So if that had been if the 1920 season had been a full season, he could have had 70 points again. I think 4.5 million for Hoffman is actually a pretty good deal. He's 31, but it's 3 years. I think he's going to really thrive in Montreal. They've needed some offense. They need a finisher, and I think Hoffman is that guy. I think this contract's going to end up being a steal. If he scores 30 goals at 4.5 million, that's a steal, and I think he will do just that in Montreal. Okay, we're going to move on from that one. Next, we're going to get into one of the biggest trades of the offseason, and I think this is a very underrated move. So, Colorado acquires Darcy Kemper from the Arizona Coyotes for a restricted free agent Connor Timmins, a 2022 first-round pick, and a conditional third in 2024. So, Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this move?
I'm kind of mixed between it. I like Connor Timmins as a young defenseman. I think he'll become a top 4 guy. And I mean, the first round pick's a first round pick. Arizona keeps stacking up on first, but Darcy Kemper to me strikes as a guy. He played under a great system under Rick Tocchet, and it's like ever since he met Rick Tocchet and played under him, he's had elite numbers. In LA, he wasn't like this. I think in Minnesota, he had a lot of good years. But that's because he was playing 10 to 15 games a year, which is a small sample size. Now, Kemper is definitely going to fill the need of a starting goalie, and I still think he gets around a .917, 2.4 goals against average, simply because it's Colorado, and he's still a good goalie. So, to me, is that he gets injured a lot. And the Avs don't really have a backup goalie. Besides Francouz, who didn't play at all last year. And he's injury prone too. So it's like if not Doom, like if Kemper gets hurt, what's the backup plan? And I think you kind of need a backup plan in that situation. Plus, he's a UFA. If you're getting up a first and a top 4 prospect, I would assume there would be some sort of contract extension in place. But so far, we haven't heard anything if they're talking yet. So for me, it's pretty risky. I say Arizona wins the deal simply by the return, but I do think Kemper is a good add for the Colorado Avalanche. And we'll see if he extends or not. He's already around 30, 31 years old. So if they can lock him up to a 4 or 4 year deal around 35, I think that's perfect for them. But he has to stay healthy.
Yeah, I definitely think health is a concern, but if Kemper stays healthy, I think Colorado actually wins this deal. He was putting up Vezina numbers just 2 seasons ago in Arizona. He had 3 straight seasons of a 9.25 save percentage. Last year, or no, 2 straight seasons rather. Last season was a down year, of course, for him, but I think in front of a much better defense, or rather behind a much better defense in Colorado, I think he's going to put up Vezina numbers again. And after losing Grubauer, a lot of people questioned the Landeskog deal, and they said this Landeskog deal cost Colorado their goalie, and they don't have a solution in net. But I think bringing in Kemper is huge. As for Arizona, they did have to move on from him. They need to rebuild. I think getting Timmins in a first is good. Now that first is going to be a late first because I think Colorado is going to easily make the playoffs and potentially make a very deep playoff run. But still, I think they were right to unload Kemper. But I think for Colorado, this is an upgrade in net over what they had last year. Grubauer in that playoff series against Vegas, he was not at his best, and that potentially cost them a shot at the cup. I think that this year having Kemper in net, if he stays healthy, could be what it takes for them to get over the hump. Okay, so now the rest of the deals, there were some more minor ones, but I believe that'll be it, unless there's another one you wanted to talk about. Again, there were a ton of deals, so we may have missed one. I guess we can just finish up with Brandon Saad. I think that's probably the last deal that's big enough to talk about. We won't get into Perry or any of these other smaller ones. But we'll finish up with Saad unless there's a smaller one that you were particularly interested in, and then we'll wrap up. What do you think?
I don't think there's any. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Okay, so let's just finish up with Brandon Saad. I didn't expect this one, to be honest. Brandon Saad, 5 years, 4.5 million with the St. Louis Blues. So, Shaedon, what are your thoughts on this one?
I love it for St. Louis. I think Saad's still a very good top six player. So, I think especially his two-way games is incredible. He can get you 20 goals. And I think he's the replacement for when Vladimir Tarasenko gets traded. And I think the contract might be a bit too long, maybe a year too long, but it's fine. I think the money is perfect. Other than that, yeah, I just love this deal for the Blues.
I think he will come close to replacing Hoffman's offense. Now I know Hoffman wasn't as productive as he was last year with the Blues, but I think if they had kept him, he could have done better offensively. So I think bringing in Saad can help offset that. When they lose Tarasenko, it is a problem, but I do like the money. And I think 5 years is actually not so bad because he's 28. He has a good defensive game, so he should be able to, even if his offense fades, he should still be able to be productive later in that deal. He'll provide leadership. The Blues, their cup window, they won a cup, but they don't have too much time left with this core. Some would say the cup window is already closed. I don't know about that, but this certainly makes them more competitive in the Central Division, which is getting tighter and tighter. Chicago's improving. Winnipeg, I think, got better this offseason too. So should be interesting to see whether or not this Saad can help lead the Blues back to the playoffs, back to further rounds in the playoffs. But I think overall this is a good contract. Okay, so unless there's anything else, and I believe that's it. No more deals in the last minute here. So that'll be it for our episode. This was a longer one. There was a ton of content in this one, but we hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please remember to leave a like and comment if you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time, hopefully with a lot more news this off season.